There is a very specific, deeply soul-crushing brand of humiliation that you only truly understand when you're standing in your own front yard, the grass cool beneath your feet, wearing socks adorned with tiny, grinning pepperoni pizzas, while a police officer with his hand hovering uncomfortably close to his holster asks you, with a completely straight face, to step away from your own rocking chair. The afternoon sun was heavy over Willow Creek Estates in Savannah, Georgia, but the vibe was anything but Southern hospitality as the blue and red strobe lights of the cruiser bounced rhythmically off my vinyl siding, creating this surreal, unwanted disco effect that felt like a fever dream I couldn't wake up from. My coffee mug, which featured the ironic slogan, "I don't work here," was slowly losing its heat in my hand, and as I looked from the steam rising out of the cup to the weary eyes of the officer, I peered past his shoulder to the meticulously manicured lawn across the street where the architect of my current misery was stationed. Eleanor Thorne. She was standing there in a floral tracksuit that looked like a botanical garden had suffered a catastrophic explosion on a mid-sized sedan, her phone held horizontally like a weapon, her face contorted into a mask of righteous indignation as she pointed a sharp, acrylic nail directly at my chest. "He's doing it again, officer. Look at his eyes. He's clearly under the influence of something. He's loitering with malicious intent, and I won't have my property values destroyed by this vagrancy." Her voice had the exact tonal quality of a metal fork being fed into a high-speed garbage disposal, and I watched Sergeant Silas Whitaker, as his nameplate identified him, let out a sigh so heavy, so profound, it felt like the collective exhaustion of every public servant who had ever lived. He looked like a man who had joined the force to catch bank robbers or solve high-stakes mysteries, only to find himself spent and graying while mediating disputes about the height of privet hedges and the exact placement of recycling bins. He looked at me, and honestly, I felt for him, because as much as I wanted to be back in my house, I knew he wanted to be anywhere else on this planet. "Sir," Sergeant Whitaker said, his voice as flat as a week-old soda, "do you actually reside at this address?" "I bought the house 6 months ago, Sergeant," I replied, gesturing toward the front door with my lukewarm coffee. "The bank technically owns the soul of the building, but my name is on the deed. I pay the property taxes, and I spent 3 grueling coats of midnight navy paint on that door last weekend. So yes, this is my home." "And what, exactly, were you doing on the porch just now?" "I was sitting," I said, the simplicity of the statement feeling absurd in the face of 2 squad cars. "I was sitting in my wooden rocking chair, reading a psychological thriller titled The Crimson Veil, and I had just reached the part where the protagonist realizes the phone call is coming from inside the house when..." "He's lying." Eleanor shrieked from across the asphalt, taking 2 aggressive steps off her curb, but stopping just short of the street, as if my property line were made of molten lava. "He wasn't reading. He was surveillance gathering. He was staring menacingly at the children on their bicycles. He was casing the block. He's been watching the patterns of the neighborhood for hours." I blinked, looking at the empty street where the only children were a couple of teenagers 3 houses down staring at their phones. "Eleanor, the only thing I was watching was a squirrel trying to hoist a stale bagel up an oak tree. And if I'm being honest, I was emotionally invested in his success." "Do not address me," she screamed, her face turning a shade of magenta that matched her tracksuit. "Officer, add verbal assault to the report. Harassment. Menacing. Loitering." Sergeant Whitaker rubbed his temples, turning to his partner, a young kid named Officer Sterling, who looked like he had graduated from the academy 20 minutes ago and was currently vibrating with the effort of not bursting into laughter. "Sterling, run his ID. Let's just get the paperwork over with." I reached for my wallet, realized I was in gym shorts, and remembered it was sitting on my kitchen island next to the invitation for the Willow Creek HOA mixer that I was definitely 100% skipping now. I asked for permission to enter my own domicile, which felt like asking a hall monitor for a bathroom pass in my own life, and retreated inside to grab my license. As I walked back out, I could see Eleanor live-streaming the entire event to her Whispering Pines Watchdogs Facebook group, narrating my walk as if I were a perp being led to a holding cell. "He's a 30-year-old data analyst, Sergeant," I said, handing over my ID while looking down at my pizza socks. "I work from home. My biggest adrenaline rush is when a pivot table works on the first try. Do I really look like a threat to the moral fabric of Georgia? Whitaker looked at my license, then at the socks, then at the screeching woman across the street. Look, Mr. Vance, we got a call. We have to respond. And the caller alleged suspicious behavior and erratic movement. But the truth is, you're not breaking any laws. You can't loiter on your own porch. That's just called living. But then his voice dropped, becoming a low, weary plea. But she's going to keep calling, and when she calls, we have to come, and I really don't want to spend my Tuesday afternoon looking at your socks. So could you maybe just take it inside? For the sake of the peace. I looked at him, and for a second, I almost did it. I almost surrendered my porch to the neighborhood tyrant. But then I saw Eleanor's face. She was smirking. It was that tight, smug little purse of the lips that said, I own you, I own this street, and I can snap my fingers to make the world bend to my will. If I went inside now, she wouldn't stop at the porch. Next week it would be my curtains, then my mailbox, then the very air I breathed. No, I said, and the word felt like a mountain moving. I'm not under arrest. I'm not being detained, and I'm going to finish my chapter. I sat back down, picked up my book, and stared directly at Eleanor Thorne as the police cruisers finally pulled away. She hissed, an actual, feline hiss, and slammed her front door so hard I felt the vibration in my teeth. But as I sat there, the adrenaline fading into a cold, hard resolve, I knew this wasn't the end. I pulled up Facebook and saw her post, criminal elements in our midst. Police tied by the liberal agenda. Stay safe. Neighbors, the man at 402 Highland Drive is casing our homes. The comments were a bloodbath of Karens and keyboard warriors calling for my head. My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with the realization that I was no longer just a neighbor. I was a target. And if Eleanor Thorne wanted to play a game of rules and shadows, I was going to give her a masterclass in both. I opened my laptop and typed in two things: highest-rated deck contractors in Savannah and private investigators specializing in civil harassment. If she didn't like me sitting on a simple wooden chair, she was absolutely going to despise the fortress I was about to build. The war for Highland Drive officially commenced the following Monday at exactly 7 a.m., the very second the local noise ordinance allowed for the screams of industrial machinery to tear through the suburban silence. I had spent the weekend memorizing the Willow Creek HOA handbook like it was a holy text, finding every loophole, every gray area, and every technicality that had been buried under decades of bureaucracy. A thunderous rumble shook my windows as a lifted Ford F-350, painted the color of a bruised sky, pulled up to my curb, hauling a trailer stacked high with premium cedar that smelled like the deep, aromatic vengeance of the forest. Out stepped a man who looked like he had been carved out of a granite cliffside, Ironside Hank. He was 6 feet 4 inches, wore a neon shirt with the sleeves ripped off to reveal arms the size of my torso, and possessed a beard that likely housed its own ecosystem. You the one who wants the maximum variance special? Hank asked, his voice sounding like a rock slide. I want a deck that is legal to the millimeter, Hank, I said, handing him a coffee. And I want it to be a visual fortress. Son, Hank grinned, exposing a gap-toothed smile. I've been building decks for 20 years, and half of them were built specifically to annoy someone across the street. Let's get to work. Within minutes, the sound of a circular saw ripped through the morning air, and like a demon summoned by a ritual, Eleanor's front door flew open. She marched across the street in a frenzy, her visor tilted at a rakish angle, screaming about permits and peace and the sanctity of the morning. But Hank didn't even look up. He just pointed to the laminated permit I had taped to the front window. Permit hashtag 992B, approved by the city for structural safety remediation. Termites, ma'am. Hank lied with the practiced ease of a storyteller. Invisible ones, the kind that eat wood and then move on to human calcium. I'm basically a first responder here, saving your house from a structural collapse you can't even see. As the cedar walls of my new porch began to rise, featuring a 4K, integrated privacy screen that allowed me to see out but blocked any prying eyes from seeing in, I took the next step in my counteroffensive. I drove down to a part of Savannah that didn't make it into the tourism brochures, parked behind a shop that sold things I didn't want to name, and knocked on a steel door that read Salvatore and Associates. Vinny the Ghost Salvatore was a man who looked like he had been born in a dim room with a cigarette in his mouth, his skin the color of old parchment, and his eyes two sharp flints of cold intelligence. He didn't ask for my life story. He just asked for the name. Eleanor Thorne, I said, sliding a photo across the desk. She's the president of the Willow Creek HOA. She's filing false reports, and she thinks she's the moral compass of the county. Vinny looked at the photo, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. You know, Mr. Vance, people who spend their lives policing others usually do it because they're terrified of someone looking into their own backyard. Give me 48 hours. I'll find the body she's buried, or at least the one she's tried to compost. Back at the house, the tension had reached a fever pitch. Hank and his crew were being delightfully petty, angling their sawdust blowers so a fine mist of cedar glitter coated Eleanor's driveway every time she tried to sweep. On Wednesday, the HOA sent a formal notice of aesthetic violation, carrying a $500 fine for excessive deck height. I paid it immediately, but I attached a note. Please keep the change, there's more coming. The breaking point happened on Friday afternoon. Hank's truck was parked legally on the street, but Eleanor had called in a commercial obstruction report, claiming the hitch was a fire hazard. A traffic officer, looking bored and annoyed, slapped a ticket on the windshield. I watched from the window as Eleanor stood on her lawn, arms crossed, looking like she had just won a war of attrition. But that evening, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Vinny. Meet me at the diner on Abercorn Street. Bring a stomach for some very old, very dirty laundry. When I arrived, Vinny slid a manila folder toward me that felt heavier than it looked. Inside wasn't just dirt. It was a goddamn archaeological dig of scandal. Your neighbor isn't just a busybody, Oliver, Vinny whispered, leaning in. Her name isn't even Eleanor Thorne, or at least, it wasn't 10 years ago in Columbus, Ohio. Back then, she was Eleanor Kowalski, and she didn't just move to Georgia for the weather. She moved to disappear. I scanned the documents, my heart racing. 3 active bench warrants. 1 for illegal dumping of hazardous household waste. 1 for a high-speed pursuit following a disorderly conduct incident at a Starbucks. And the crown jewel, a hit-and-run involving a city-owned vehicle. She had skipped bail, vanished into the ether, and reinvented herself as the queen of a gated community in Savannah, weaponizing the law because she was terrified it would finally catch up to her. She's a fugitive? I asked, breathless. A petty one, but a fugitive nonetheless, Vinny said. But here's the kicker. Georgia and Ohio have a reciprocal agreement for these specific classes of misdemeanors. If she's identified in an active police encounter, they have to pick her up. I looked at the folder, then at the photo of her mugshot. Eyes wild, hair a mess, looking nothing like the woman in the tracksuit. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I didn't need to call the police on her. I just needed her to call the police on me one last time. The finale was set for a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the first encounter. The fortress porch was complete, a masterpiece of cedar and defiance that stood as a silent middle finger to the Thorne residents. I had installed what Hank called the caught red-handed lighting package, solar-powered lanterns that looked like high-end decor but were actually 4K motion-activated cameras with cloud-syncing audio. At 10 a.m., Hank and I rolled a small folding table to the very edge of my driveway. We draped it in a bright, checkered tablecloth and set out a massive glass pitcher of ice-cold, fresh-squeezed lemonade, complete with mint sprigs and red Solo cups. But the centerpiece was the sign, printed in a bold, cheerful font. Whispering Pines Refreshment Station, complimentary for all residents. Note, service refused to anyone named Eleanor due to pending litigation regarding bad vibes. I sat back in my rocking chair, hidden behind the privacy screen, and watched the iPad monitor. Like clockwork, the door at 405 Highland Drive creaked open. Eleanor stepped out, visor on, ready to water her petunias. She saw the table. She saw the sign. Through the camera's high-def zoom, I watched her face transition from confusion to a shade of purple that was medically concerning. She didn't even bother with the non-emergency line this time. She went straight for the big guns. 10 minutes later, 2 cruisers pulled up, including Sergeant Whitaker, who looked like he wanted to drive his car into a tree rather than deal with us again. Eleanor was already in the street, screaming about unlicensed commercial enterprises, health code violations, and intentional emotional battery. "Sergeant, look at this," she shrieked. "He's running a business. In an R1 zone. He's inciting a riot with this libelous signage. Whitaker walked up to the table, looked at the free sign, and sighed. Ma'am, it's not a business if it's free, and being mean to you isn't a crime. It's just a choice. I want him arrested, she bellowed, her voice echoing through the entire neighborhood, drawing curious neighbors out onto their porches. I am a tax-paying citizen with a flawless record, and I will not be mocked by a loiterer. I walked down the steps, the manila folder tucked under my arm, my heart thumping a steady rhythm of justice. You sure about that record, Eleanor? I asked, my voice calm, projecting across the lawn. Don't you speak to me, you thug, she spat. I ignored her and turned to Whitaker. Sergeant, I think you should take a look at this. I did some research on the moral compass of our neighborhood, and it turns out, Ohio has been looking for her since 2019. I handed him the folder. The air in the cul-de-sac seemed to freeze. Whitaker flipped through the pages, his eyebrows climbing higher with every second. He looked at the mugshot, then at the woman in the tracksuit. He handed the folder to his partner, who jogged back to the cruiser to run a national database check. Eleanor's face didn't just go pale. It went gray, the color of wet ash. She took a step back toward her house. I have to go inside. I'm having a medical emergency. I feel faint. Stay right there, ma'am, Whitaker said, his voice no longer weary, but sharp and authoritative. We need to clarify a few things about a certain hit-and-run in Columbus. 30 seconds later, the partner gave a thumbs up. Warrants are active, Sarge. Extradition is confirmed. They want her. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the most melodic thing I had ever heard in my life. Eleanor Thorne, or Eleanor Kowalski, didn't go quietly. She screamed about police brutality. She threatened to sue the sun for shining, and she cursed my name until she was ducked into the back of the cruiser. Mrs. Higgins from 3 doors down, who had been a silent victim of Eleanor's tyranny for years, watched the car pull away, then quietly raised her coffee mug to me in a silent, respectful toast. Sergeant Whitaker walked back over to the table, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked at the pitcher. Is that actually lemonade? Best you've ever had, Sergeant, I said, pouring him a cup. He took a long, slow drink, exhaled a sigh of genuine relief, and looked at the new deck. Nice porch, Mr. Vance. Try to keep the bad vibes to a minimum, okay? The neighborhood's already feeling lighter, Sergeant, I replied, as the sirens faded into the distance, taking the drama and the darkness with them. I walked back up to my cedar sanctuary. I sat in my rocking chair, opened the Crimson Veil, and finally finished the chapter. The silence of the suburbs had never sounded so sweet. In the end, Eleanor was extradited to Ohio, where she faced the music for her decade-old mistakes, losing her house and her status in Savannah in the process. It raises the question, when does looking out for the neighborhood cross the line into criminal hypocrisy? Was my fortress porch a justified defense, or did I become a different kind of monster by digging up a past she had tried to leave behind? Does the law exist to protect us, or is it just a weapon for whoever knows how to pull the trigger first? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did the punishment fit the crime, or did I go too far?
And we are at the end of the videos. I hope you had a great time watching it. If you had any feedback or suggestion for the future videos, drop them in the comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching and see you next time.